for the city, you know, and I think we need to think more broadly about our responsibility in terms of the city that we're building. Vicky, did you have a... Oh, Yanni.
I just want to pick up on that point. What is the test? So, because what we know is 99% of non-complying, non-notified, 99 or 95% of resource consents that are non-complying get non-notified and get approved. So, what is the test around going away from that outline development zoning as to how easy is it for people to basically...
But we don't have the zones now. That was the point that they were making.
So they're putting the zones in, but what we've been told is that it still doesn't mean that you can't...
No, but that's what I'm sending, a very strong signal that we want this to be a prohibited activity.
Okay, is that...
I mean, you know, we need to actually put a line in the sand here that if there are going to be developments of new communities, there has to be amenity attached to it. There has to be the capacity for communities to bump into each other in a way that creates real communities.
So the question I think we need to get some information back on is how easy is it for people to avoid what's in the outline development plan and the zoning that's creating in the district plan review? And how could we make it really hard for people, you know, unless there was a very, very good reason?
Well, I'm actually suggesting that there's no good reason.
We can look to improve the policy wording to give stronger weight to that.
I think it should be the activity status, though, isn't it? The activity status, that whether it's prohibited, restricted,
I might be going too far, but I often do. Really but it's to make the point that we as a city are responsible for the developments going forward. And I know that, you know, having come from an area that had a lot of development done over recent years, you know, and I look at Tamara Park, for example, it's just criminal that was allowed to build without any facility at all, and I know that they had it in the original plan and they just gave up because it was too hard.
We can look at strengthening that further.
Yep.
To that, this is about community amenity, but it's also about, without that amenity, we strain our traffic infrastructure.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah,
that's right. So it's a twofold thing.
Yeah, I know. It's a multiple whammy, not just a double whammy. Yeah, David.
You talk about strengthening it, though, but I take Yanni's point. You know, how can we strengthen it to a degree where a developer just doesn't get around it? Yeah. So I mean, there's a fine line between prohibited and you know, really strengthening it. And I do take Yanni's point that, you know, so often we get these
non-notified.
Non-notified developments, sort of variations go through, and it's done and dusted before anybody knows anything's happened.
But to be fair, the reason for that is because the current district plan doesn't necessarily have all of the objectives and policies written in a way that they should be or could be, in order to make it difficult for any of those, the test against the non-compliance activity status. So this is what we're focusing on here, and I keep saying that even before the earthquakes occurred in 2010, we were supposed to start this district plan review. We all knew that there were issues then with the existing district plan, even before the earthquakes, and this is one of them that Yanni has raised, is the objectives and policies aren't always written as carefully as they need to be.
Yep.
All right. With that in mind, do some of the objectives need to be changed to strengthen this as well?
Yes, I've said that we will look at strengthening it as much as we can.
Yeah. All right. Next policy.
Objective 2, Clause E is introduced, which is about recognising Ngāi Tahu mana whenua values. My colleagues may have spoken about it previously, but there's been a Runanga focus group established for this review, which has enabled input from 6 Runanga
Actually, you jumped over policy 6, Banks Peninsula Commercial Centres, and I know that's because you didn't make any changes to it.
Oh,
but I've been thinking about the, you know, the nature of, you know, plans that will come out of the Littleton redevelopment, And I know that Andrew Turner shares the concern in this regard, but there is potential for commercial development right down to the to the harbour, which every other major city in the country has taken advantage of, opening up their harbours, and ours is Littleton, and it's beautiful. And there's an extraordinary sense of opportunity that then allows for a link between the main street, which is a commercial development. The commercial developments on the street that runs through Littleton, what's that called? Norwich Quay. I mean, it's dead because the buildings are dead. So, and the potential for opening up the waterfront. And I think that there needs to be something in our plan that actually allows for that to occur. And I'm a little worried that we could be being a little too restrictive in this regard.
If I may just make a comment there, in fact, that is exactly what we are looking at, but it is a part of the second group of activities.
Right.
We need to link it into the port company's development plans. We need to link it into, the Littleton master plan and what's happening in this role here. That will come back to this committee.
Yeah,
in the
I'm just
second
worried
round.
that the Littleton master plan may be a little too, lacking in ambition, as it were, and lacking as in scope, because it is restricted to the main street.
Can I say that? And there's also
there's
also potentially the ability for I understand that a recovery plan is being looked at for all of the ports. Whether it's dealt through that or through this district plan under the port zone, we will definitely come back to that area.
Yeah, okay. Well, as long as we're signalling that, Andrew.
If I can just make another comment on that as well, that's one of the reasons for the comments I made earlier, where we're looking at rezoning some of the current commercial land on Norwich Quay to port land. My view in terms of the Littleton master plan, the community aspirations, all of that, is that we should just leave that the way it is for the moment and then look at it in the context of that port recovery plan that you mentioned and the district plan review of the port. Otherwise, I think we'll be seen as being acting in bad faith and against the aspirations of the master plan if we were to do that at this stage. I mean, I agree we need to take that whole holistic view of Littleton. The way we go about it will really influence the way the community embraces it. So we need to tread quite carefully.
Accepted.
Very good. Sorry, carry on. Objective 2.
I was just saying that there's a Runanga focus group that was established to enable input from the Runanga on the district plan, and this policy addition acknowledges the values of the Runanga, and that comes through more clearly in the industrial chapter in the rules, but also in the commercial chapter through considering design of new developments, how it recognises those values. So, Policy 9. There's in the draft that was consulted on, there was a policy on suburban centre master plans, but we've amended it slightly to focus on the attractiveness and amenity of these suburban.
Let's go back to policy 7.
Sorry, policy 7.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, my apologies. The bit where we've got page 7, subsection 5, enabling visitors to a centre to orientate themselves and find their way with strong visual and physical connections. Is there any way in which we can make that a requirement of a C4 zone, such as the university? So, for example...
So where is that?
It's on page 7A, Roman numeral 5.
Okay, so that's actually policy 8.
Policy 8, yes. Yeah, but you were going on to policy 9.
Yeah.
So, when you arrive, for example, at the university, there is no sense of place or direction. All the buildings are grey. They all look very similar. They are about to redesign some of those or rebuild some of those. Is there any way that we can have that sense of being able to find your way visually incorporated into other parts of the plan?
Yes, indeed. And again, that's one of the zones that we'll be dealing with in the second lot of chapters. Currently, the university sits within a cultural zone. Whether or not we keep that approach or have some kind of special purpose education zone, I don't know for the university, but yes, we can incorporate that kind of policy into that chapter, whichever it is. No.
So if they're required to do it, but their buildings are there and there is no sort of visual way of orientating themselves, presumably they can do add-ons to buildings or something that makes it possible for a person to find their way.
That's right, but the district plan is not retrospective, so they would have to come in with a consent to want to do something to a building, and then we could perhaps require them to do that.
Can you require them to do it over a broader field than their new building?
I'd have to get some legal advice on that. It depends on what they're doing.
It might be worthwhile just having a chat to them.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is the right place to address it, but we have got the big malls over like the large format centres. So what we need is a requirement that they provide a certain amount of, over a certain size, if they wish to expand, they provide a required space that comes back either to the council or to ECAN to provide a bus, public passenger transport amenity, and also I think actually some community amenity. So there's a huge issue with safety. Many of the car parks that the malls have are quite dangerous, and they've got very poor pedestrian flow. And I think actually what's needed is for something stronger, that we actually have a chance to create a much better level of amenity. And we also need something that means that when they get to a certain size, there's a requirement that they give something back to local neighbourhoods. Because what's happening is they're encroaching far too greatly without any provision for the essential infrastructure that we need in local neighbourhoods.
Those are good issues. I wonder if you wouldn't mind keeping that question until we go into the transport chapter, because it deals with those car park areas, particularly the malls.
And I just think it's really more about over a certain scale, there needs to be a requirement to give something back. You can't just buy up every road, every house in a local neighbourhood and suddenly have this huge mega mall without any responsibility to actually dedicate some space back to the community, in my view. So, the transport is just one issue, and I appreciate we can deal with the more specifics about the integrated transport development plans or whatever we're doing, but there's a more fundamental issue, which is, you cannot just keep expanding and swamping the local community.
Yeah. Look, can I just back that up? I think that, we'd love to do this retrospectively, and we know that we can't, but, we're caught between a rock and a hard place, both in Northlands and the development at Riccarton, and we're seeing, future large format centres being developed, where it is crystal clear that we need to have some sort of integrated transport facility, where a bus interchange or whatever it's going to be called, where people who use those large centres will also be using public transport. And we know that there is a strong correlation around use in those centres, use of public transport in those centres. But finding the right space to provide, to retrofit after the fact is such a downside. In other cities where they have, fully integrated their transport planning into the mall developments, they essentially run the bus interchange into the mall itself. So it's an integrated flow for people and buses and the external transport movements as part of your, main street frontage. And we really have to get this right. And I know that I'd love to just go in and whip out some of Riccarton Mall's land and build the most amazing transport interchange. But we don't want to be forced into making the wrong decision for our city by putting it in a wrong location just because it's there.
Agreed, and the desire is to have the transport interchange or what have you integrated with the malls. There are several aspects to this issue. Perhaps if I can ask Mark to respond and possibly even David as well and Brent, because as you say, it does impact on a number of things.
Yeah. Okay.
The feedback has. The Regional Council Environment Canterbury has provided similar feedback that the larger scale developments and the larger centres like Riccarton and Hornby we should be taking or getting some improvements as part of these developments, and there's a number of options that have been discussed, some of which require non-district plan measures. The most obvious is development contributions. That requires obviously works to be programmed into the capital works program to identify infrastructure, and then pegging development contributions onto the developers to pay a contribution towards funding of those works. Second is financial contributions, which some district plans have, which is a mechanism to take financial contribution as a condition of resource consent. But the difficulty of that approach is that a financial contribution has to be directly associated with an adverse impact of that development. So we need to assess what's the effect going to be of that development and how can we link it to what we're taking money for. The third would be to have a rule in the plan that requires there's a public space provided as part of every development, and drawing a line of what the threshold is challenging, because you tend to, that there's potentially a lot of small scale developments that could occur that would be below that threshold, but together combined necessitate a public space to address that demand. What I think is required is a plan for how the centre is going to develop over the future, and we've got that in the master plans for some of the suburban centres, which at least guides where we want public space to be in the future, and we can say that because we want a public space here, that's obviously where investment should be directed, but the risk of requiring each individual development to put in place a public space is that, or every large development to put in place a public space, is that you potentially end up with a series of smaller spaces when what could be achieved is a much better large space.
The suburban centre master plans are not any of the areas that we're talking about.
No.
They're all the key activity centres. They're in those large-scale developments. And I don't think anyone's talking about development contributions or financial contributions. We need the land that directly associates the bus interchange with the mall. That's, so that people can walk from the mall into the interchange. And it should be part of the development. I mean, we're thinking now historically about something we can't fix at Riccarton without requiring, using our requiring status as an authority to take some of their land, which we'd have to buy at commercial value. But, I guess at the end of the day, we have the power to do that. But it seems to me that if we're thinking about planning for the future, wouldn't we want to write into the plan that if there are large-scale developments like this going to go in other places, then they have to make provision for such a facility for the public use, public transport. Yeah, Phil.
Well, I'd really like to see how we can develop those plans for all, like Barrington is another case in point, where it's kind of like grown like Topsy. At one stage they were okay with buses going through the car park. Then they said, no, we're not having them, so we're having more cars. And we've got that problem where we're retrofitting. So is there still scope for us to have plans around these existing malls so that in fact we can, I guess it's direct the traffic more. And as has been referred to, a community focus as well for people to meet and sit down, besides the little cafes that are there already.
David?
Yeah. For the new centres, we have got a policy in the transport chapter that we will ensure that they provide public transport interchanges, and so we did that in Belfast, so the new development in Radcliffe Road. We've set aside some land for public transport interchange, and we're now working with the people in Hallsville for that new North Hallsville centre to try and get a new interchange there. It's a lot harder, as we all said, for existing centres and for respective centres. We have got assessment matters so that when there is new expansions of existing centres, that they will need to consider whether they provide public transport interchanges. But we're very much reliant through a district plan on them coming up with a development plan. So rather than us just sitting back and waiting for them to do an expansion, we also need to be proactive, and that's why we're obviously working with Westfield at the moment for the Richmond interchange. And unfortunately, because we may need to use our own funds and some of the Local Government Act provisions to be able to get land, acquire land for Westfield, obviously because it's an already existing centre, but we are working with them on that.
You're working with them, but with having a new district plan, okay, to try and sort it, if existing malls want to expand any further, should we not have written to our plan that we will require them to have an overall plan of the whole thing? Can we not do that?
We could do that, yes,
Yeah,
we can do that.
Well, it just seems to me that would ameliorate some of the problems we're facing with the existing malls.
It would, but just simply asking them for an overall plan, I mean, they may only be expanding, for instance, to add one extra shop. It doesn't necessarily mean to say there will be sufficient land there to then provide a bus interchange. That's why we have to potentially use other routes as well.
What's been done in the central city is an example where there's been a requirement for an outline development plan for a minimum area, and that's required developers to either work together or to prepare competing outline development plans.
Outline